Oh baby, I shoot raw. ODB, old digital here this week with a deeper look at something that many Android lovers got access to with the release of Samsung's S22 Ultra, the new Expert RAW app.
Yeah, baby, I like it raw.
Some reviews have even touched on what it is and how it works, like my review of the S22 Ultra, but when should you consider using it instead of the standard camera app in its regular or pro modes? I'm going to show you with photo examples when you should consider using it and how to get the most out of it. Expert RAW for those who aren't photo pros, examined after the open. Let me set some expectations right from jump, right here. 1, if you are an amateur or a professional photographer, the words, the dialogue is not aimed specifically at you. I'm going to explain some things in a manner which is easily understood rather than technically accurate white paper material. It's more important to understand the concept and use case than to be able to write a technical paper on the subject for the purposes of this video. Okay? So let's begin with the interface. There are some things which you may not be aware of, which will help you get the shot just how you want it, even before you set out to manipulate it in Snapseed or Lightroom. Beginning from right to left, the histogram. I know we'll be fighting in the comments, but this is really only valuable for knowing if you're clipping any highlight or shadow details at certain exposure settings. That in and of itself is a whole video, but I'll include a link to a really good article on the use of the histogram if you really want to go down that rabbit hole. Second icon, up here, you'll see kind of next to the histogram, above it actually, you'll see it both in the Pro mode and the standard app as well, is the metering modes. I think these are much more impactful than learning and using the histogram. These modes will control how the camera exposes the image based on where your subject is in the screen. From right to left, you have 3 modes: spot, matrix, and center weighted. I'm going to show you how using spot metering will actually get you better exposure on that sign automatically. Let's check it out. So right now that is center metering mode, and you see how it kind of exposes toward everything in the center of frame. So it's balancing the brightness of the sign with the blackness of the background. Matrix metering, you see the image brightened up because it's looking at the entire frame and taking some values, some percentages, some grays and different things from the different quadrants. And then spot mode, boom. Spot metering is looking at the fine details, the small parts in the sign, the letters here, and exposing specifically for that against the dark background. And now we're at my metro stop that I always take my night mode photo comparisons where I shoot those. We want to expose for the sign. So with spot metering, you'll notice how dark everything is around the sign. With matrix metering, you notice how everything brightens up because, again, it's looking at the total frame and not just a small spot. And with center weighted, you see it darkens back down and kind of balances your image out a little more in this case. So for spot metering, that's going to be great, again, for like shooting the moon. There's no moon out tonight, so I couldn't shoot that. That's going to be great for like a concert. If you're out at a concert and you know the stage is bright and everything's dark around it, you're kind of back, a little far back, and you're using the telephoto, then at the concert you're going to want to consider using, again, spot metering. Let's take the focus and manual and focus it up ourselves. See, there's my focus peaking, so that lets me know I'm in focus. And a little side note, these metering modes, as I've explained them, also work in the stock camera's Pro mode. Just again, unlike Expert RAW, you don't get the benefit of those multiple exposures and different slides that you'll get when you're using the Expert RAW captured images. Next to that is the timer settings, then the settings cog. Personally, I'd have everything in there turned on except for the high efficiency RAW mode. Turning that on brings with it the potential to have some issues when you try to edit the photo in third-party desktop software later. In expert RAW mode, you'll have control over all 4 cameras. Let's get back to there. You're going to have control over all 4 cameras and their exposures. For that, along the bottom, you'll see you have control over ISO, shutter speed, EV or exposure value, focus, and white balance. Play with all of them until you get the shot you want, and don't be afraid to mess anything up. If you swipe right, you'll see a reset button. Let's go to there. You'll see this reset button that will take your settings back to default auto, and you can start all over again, taking each exposure parameter out of auto and playing with it to achieve your look. Now, let's talk use case and practical application of the tool that is Expert RAW. There are 2 major limitations you need to know first. 1, you can only shoot in 4:3, no other sizes like 16:9. Number 2, no access to the front camera. With those things in mind, you should consider using the Expert RAW app when you want to take a photo and really want to get the best image possible. You want to go beyond capturing an image and you're done. You want to play with the color a bit, maybe the shadows, make the end result more moody by softening it or making it black and white. All the things you can do with DNG files, the Pro mode from the standard camera produces, but with the DNG files Expert RAW produces, you get more latitude to play with exposure, saturation, shadow, highlights, something called the S-curve when you get a little more advanced, because of the fact it stores multiple exposures of different slides of the same image instead of one flattened image. Let's look at this wall mural, for example. I found that with the Expert RAW camera app, that textures were more visible. The shots had more texture when I cropped in the photos as opposed to the stock camera app. You can really see the texture on this wall from the Expert RAW image. The Expert RAW images I took seem to generally be more saturated than the stock camera images as well, so you could say the stock app images look more natural. But that's the whole point of Expert RAW images. You go in after the fact to edit them to your liking. And looking at these skin tone images, I actually preferred the way the Expert RAW app rendered skin tones over the stock camera app. Now, let me just throw this in. With the stock camera app set to the 108 pixel mode, it rivals the texture quality, some of the qualities of the Expert RAW app. But many people usually shoot in the 12 megapixel mode, so you're not going to see necessarily the same level of detail that you would in the RAW 108 megapixel app. Also, you aren't going to get shutter burst mode with the Expert RAW app. So let's take a look at these beach photos. They make a good example of what Expert RAW editing is all about. With RAW images with so much data, you can really push your edits to the limit before the image begins to degrade. For example, I can play with the white or highlight levels on the white water and the blue of the sky and really push their saturation before it messes up the image with the Expert RAW image. With the standard camera capture, I have less headroom to push those same parameters before the image degrades. What do I mean by degrades? I mean, I can push the colors or the highlights further before they begin looking like this. Remember those night mode photos I took earlier? With the Expert RAW images, I can brighten them up and push colors further before the images begin to look too grainy. Now, the differences are not night and day, pardon the pun, but the flexibility of having the Expert RAW images to create highly stylized images in Photoshop or any other image editor like Lightroom on your mobile or Snapseed again is the most important factor. For example, my son is very interested in product photography, so he might take a pic of something, then put it into Photoshop or GIMP, a free open source app similar to Photoshop, and flip the colors or put some really cool effect on it. You might be putting together a presentation for work and looking to shoot pics of something and stylize them yourself. Another use case for Expert RAW, forcing the phone to use the camera you want to use for a macro or close-up shot. Samsung's stock camera will use the lens it thinks is best, which means that sometimes you'll get the 3x when you wanted the 10x, and it'll just use the digital zoom to get you from 3x to 10x using the 3x telephoto instead of the 10x optical zoom that the 10x has. With Expert RAW, when you pick the 10x telephoto, it stays on the 10x telephoto, just like it does when you're using Pro mode in the standard camera app. Which brings us to another feature in Expert RAW, focus peaking. In order to use that 10x and get as close as possible to perfect focus when you're using it in manual mode, manual focus, see that green outline on objects? That lets you know that those things are in focus. This is a beautiful feature for people like me whose eyes aren't as sharp as they once were. And that's it. That pretty much walks you through the top level overview of the things you can do with Expert RAW and when to use Expert RAW. We could dive deeper into the difference between ISO and shutter speed and EV and how all that works together, but that would be a whole other video, or should be a whole other video by itself, because those are topics that you really need to kind of spend some time with to understand, instead of me doing it quickly here and not having this video be an hour long. So we may get into that in the future. If you'd like to, let me know in the comments below. Hey, I'm Tshaka Armstrong for Android Central. I don't take it lightly that you spent your time watching here with us today. If any of this has helped you, please consider hitting that thumbs up, hitting that subscribe, and if you're so inclined, hitting the notification bell so you'll be notified when I upload my latest review, or when my brother from another mother, Alex Delby, does the same. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next video.